I'm Eric Smith. I'm from Kansas, state representative. I'm also a law enforcement officer. I'm the undersheriff for my county. I want to talk to you today about an idea that was formed more than 240 years ago by a group of men who decided that they'd had enough. We know them as the founding fathers. Everyone has the ideas of what that looked like back then, and that was developed when you were young in school and such. And probably you have some famous people that you could, when I say the names, either you can recite them or you'll go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And that's like Benjamin Franklin and John Hancock and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and names like that that we know are very famous. But there's some other people that were incredibly famous, and especially during a time when that was taught and before it was squeezed out of our education system. You see, there are a lot of people that got pushed out of education curriculum for the purpose of introducing new history. And not that new history was always wrong. I believe that there are things that we need to know about World War II and the Nazi regime and the things that the evils that men do, so that history hopefully won't be repeated. I pray. I believe that's important, but I also believe that it's important that it's very, very clear what occurred in the founding of this nation. Accuracy is important. A lot of things that we learn today, I challenge the accuracy on. For instance, of those men that I mentioned, how many were slave owners? Well, we can only determine Thomas Jefferson was obviously a slave owner. And there were a handful of others. When you look at the painting of the men who were signing the Constitution, how many of them can you name? And if you can't name them, how do you know they were slave owners? Well, because everybody was back then. No, in fact, abolishing slavery was a big issue in the writing of the Constitution. In fact, if they had put it in there, two of the states said they absolutely would refuse to sign it. And that was the only reason why they had to take it out of the Constitution. Most of the men in that Constitution Hall abhorred slavery or didn't want anything to do with slavery. That's one thing. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about is some of the critical people that were involved in making the Constitution and why they're critical. There's a man by the name of George Mason. You know, George Mason University, named after this guy who was famous for a long time. Colonel George Mason, who had authored the Virginia Constitution at that time and wanted to model the U.S. Constitution after that. And it was a fine document. But included that in this, he wanted Bill of Rights. He was one of three people who refused to sign in Constitution Hall, refused to sign the Constitution because it did not contain the Bill of Rights yet. In fact, the Bill of Rights didn't come till later. And he was also the one who wanted to make sure that this Constitution changed the form of government to we the people, and for the people and by the people. And he wanted to ensure that by putting a piece in there. So 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention, he says, "Gentlemen, we still need to put this in there." And that was in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. You will see a sentence that gives two ways to amend the Constitution. The first has been done 27 times, and that's by Congress introducing verbiage. And then a ratification process by 38 states. But also before that ratification process is a mention of a second way to introduce amendments, and that's by a convening of states. See, he wanted that in there because he wanted to make sure that the states had the individual power. They didn't have to be given permission to do this, but that by their two-thirds, or 34 of 50 states, asking for a convention, gave them the power to send delegates to a convention where they come up with ideas to restrain the federal government, should it be needed. Should the federal government overreach, and take state powers that they shouldn't have taken, we can reconvene, clarify those powers in an amendment to the Constitution that they have to follow. Now, Many are worried that if we put a group together like this, they're going to be able to rewrite a constitution. Let me remind you that the second part of Article 5 tells us that the only way to ratify any change is through 3/4 of the state legislatures. So whatever this convention comes up with, they have to come back to their state legislature and get them to buy into it. And then 37 other state legislatures have to agree to it. That's the only way to ratify. Now, if your fear is, oh my gosh, we don't want to change the Constitution, we want to keep it. We want to keep it just the way they designed it. Folks, our U.S. Constitution takes thousands of pages today, where it used to only take a few. I could hold it in a little book. Now it takes up thousands of pages. Here's the other thing I'm going to tell you. It changes every week. Now, how can I prove that to you? Well, let me tell you this. As a state representative, every year I come back to the State House, there's a box sitting out my office. And in that box are replacement books, like these behind me. See those red books down there? Those are Kansas statutes annotated. See those books up there? Those are the changes from legislation and courts and other government actions that have changed the interpretation of these laws and the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Kansas. Every year I get a book about that thick that describes the changes that we've made to constitutional interpretation. If you're afraid that a delegation is going to change the meaning of the Constitution, let me assure you that it's happening every day, and most especially in the federal government. Every time the Supreme Court gets together and gavels out, they've changed the interpretation and understanding of the Constitution. Who do you trust? The people you've elected locally, or the people that make 3 times the national average salary and become millionaires spending 40 years plus up in Congress on those salaries and others? So folks, it's time for us to take back that power. Thanks for listening to me.